Welcome to Shift, a college admissions SAT and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT test. A full textbook, tons of questions backed by our memory enhancement algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Clay Daniels from Clayborne Education with us. Really excited to have you on the show, Clay, as you are not only a friend, but the resident CLT expert, maybe in of all the tutors in the country, right? So really excited to have you here.
Thanks so much. I love to talk about the CLT and to talk test prep with you, Tyler.
Yeah, and since I said that, do you just want to introduce Clayborne Education real quick, and then also how you're involved with the CLT?
You bet. Clayborne has been around for 15 years now, since I started it in 2009. We do test prep primarily, although tutoring as well, but highly customized one-to-one test prep programs. And so when the CLT emerged a few years ago through a number of school connections that involved where my own kids go to school, I was very naturally connected with the world. The C and CLT, as we'll talk about, stands for classic. And so the form of education I was involved in and my kids were involved in got me connected to this new test. And so we've incorporated that into really what we do with students who are focusing on college prep more broadly or may have a particular focus on the CLT for reasons of the colleges that they're looking at. So it's been an exciting addition to the world of college preparation and something I love to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great place to start, right? So CLT sounds for classic, right?
Right.
Classical learning test. So what is classical learning test or even just classical learning? Like, what does that mean, right? What sort of what is the thing that it's trying to capture with the name there?
That is the $1 million question. Yes. And there's a lot of ways to answer it. I think a great way to answer it is with reference to our kind of local personality, our local hero, in a sense, Thomas Jefferson, right? I could
Mhm.
almost walk to Monticello from where I live, his home. And if you've ever taken a tour of Monticello or studied the lives of, let's say, the American founders, you learn about their education and how they learned Greek and Latin and how they read certain texts that were very ancient, really valued reading, let's say, Aristotle and Plato and making connections through them to um, Augustine and Aquinas and Dante and kind of the classics throughout history, that the best that has ever been thought and said. Or another word for it is a great books education. So the reason I bring up Jefferson is if you want to know what classical education is, in a way, it's a return to the emphases that Jefferson would have had, or the founders would have
Mhm.
had, or people really up until about 100 years ago would have had in their education. And I guess if you're looking for a difference, you might say it's a little less focused on kind of vocational training and getting a job and sort of the practical ends that modern education
Mhm.
is typically focused on. It's a classic liberal arts focus, to use a university type word. That's what
Mhm.
classical education is designed to bring to the student. The idea is that you can specialize later. You can learn what you need to for your vocation later, but what we should really be presenting students with, says classical education, is the great ideas of history, and whether we accept them all or not, whether we embrace everything that has ever been thought and said by the ancients or medieval scholars or whoever it might be, there's incredible value in exposing students to that heritage and teaching them
Mhm.
through that how to think about their world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've seen this sort of debate conversation, however you want to put it, in a couple of other places on the internet, right? Like Twitter, Reddit, and things like that, where for kind of the last, call it 10 years, ever since sort of tech startups really blew up in sort of the late aughts and early 20 teens, um, they there's been this huge emphasis on, becoming a computer scientist or going into like STEM fields. And at least where I'm from in Silicon Valley, right? Like everybody wants their kid to be in computer science or some kind of engineering. Well, now AI has shown up, and AI has made it so that realistically, quite a lot of entry level computer science jobs won't be needed in about another decade, right? Or maybe even quicker than that. And so then it's like, well, now what, right? So if you're a parent trying to tell your kid what vocation to orient their teaching and training around, you're trying to hit a moving target that is subject to externalities that you don't really control at all, and can't really predict a lot of the time, right? I don't think anybody thought AI was going to be where it is now 3 years ago. So what do, right? And sort of the counter argument is exactly what you said. You teach your kids how to think, you teach your kids how to learn, and then they can sort of adapt themselves to the future, whatever the future might hold. So I thought that was very interesting. Like, sounds very similar to what you're talking about.
Definitely.
Yeah. So then with the CLT, I mean, I know that you have spoken to sort of their CEO a bit. Like, do you know the origin story well enough to kind of repeat a summary here? Just kind of like, why was
Sure.
it created and what was the goal of it?
Yeah. So what I love about the founding story of the CLT is that um, it's both deeply philosophical and deeply practical at the same time. What I mean by that is, let's say that you know that you love this approach to education and you want to see it thrive. Uh, well, the CEO of CLT has a background in education and teaching, had had taught in public schools, recognized what kind of turns the gears in education. And for better or for worse, one of the major gear turners in education is testing. As we know,
Hmm.
curriculum is increasingly tied to testing. The idea of teaching to the test, and often tests are designed first, whether it's Common Core or whatever we're talking about, and then the curriculum is designed based on the test. And so the idea was we have this wonderful form of education. That's the philosophical, the true love of the heart side. But there's also this practical reality that curriculum is driven by testing. So the idea behind the CLT in many ways is, if we know that curriculum is going to be driven by testing, why not create the best test we can possibly create? A test that's
Hmm.
going to have you reading Dante or Aristotle or Frederick Douglass or St. Teresa of Avila, whoever it might be, Maimonides, whoever it might be in its reading and writing grammar sections, that will actually expose students to those very texts. But again, with the hope that to the extent that tests drive curriculum, that will actually enhance education more broadly if we make a really good test that fits within this model.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? To kind of want to go back to the quote unquote classics of literature, right? Like Aristotle and Plato and things like that. Um, it definitely is a different angle than the SAT and the ACT. And I guess that's probably a good kind of segue to say, like, just in both application and practical terms, and like maybe I don't know which one you want to start with, but how is this different from the SAT and ACT test?
Yeah. So the way that I've described it so far, it may make it sound like it's radically different, and I think that's both true and not true. Certainly, the kind of texts you may encounter there are going to be rich texts. Like, often after I do a
Hmm.
CLT practice test, I feel like I've been enriched. I haven't just taken a test. I've encountered profound ideas And
Hmm.
it's not that that's never the case in the SAT and ACT, but they tend to be focused on more modern practical texts. That you get the feeling that the texts are kind of a little bit of a means to an end. They're not there in and of themselves. They're there to test certain skills. Well, the CLT is able to test those same skills, but it doesn't give you the feeling that the text is just a means to an end. It actually makes you want to go find that text and like read the whole thing. You know, like that's kind of a cool difference. But it's important not to overstate the difference for a student who's maybe listening to this and thinking, what would taking the CLT be like? Well, imagine the same kind of grammar question you would see on the SAT or the ACT that's asking you whether to insert a comma here or not. You're still going to encounter that sort of question. It's just, what's the medium in which you encounter it? That's what's different.
Right. Well, and I feel like there are not just, not just that your reading comprehension passage is from, you know, Socrates. I think that
Right.
there's also a little bit of a different philosophy in how the questions are written, right?
There
Yeah,
is.
can you share more about that?
Yeah. And maybe a good way to come at that would be specifically by means of the area of logic.
Hmm.
If if our listeners were to kind of, I'd be curious when I say the word logic, kind of what parts of their education they tie it to, because I think schools certainly still teach logic, but it tends to be kind of atomized in different places. Let's make a logical argument within the context of, let's say, our history or government class. Well,
Hmm.
classical education will actually teach logic as a separate subject. You take informal logic, you take formal logic, you continue to understand logic as it relates to, say, geometry, which is a very logical, step by step kind of math subject. So, a couple of specific examples on the CLT. One is it's got something that used to be on standardized tests, but mostly isn't anymore: analogy questions. Fully
Uh,
20% of the reading or verbal reasoning questions on the CLT are analogy questions where you get a stem pair of words. This is to this. Bear is to mammal. So that's a type
mhm,
relationship. A bear is a type of mammal. And then you
mhm,
have to find an identical relationship with a different pair of words in the answer. That's a very logical approach to a test that you won't see
mhm,
on the SAT and ACT. And then I would just add too that the math section you'll also see much more direct logic questions. I think the ACT and SAT are very sneaky logical tests in the sense that
mhm,
they're math sections. If you apply a certain amount of logic, you actually can go very far without like knowing the textbook approach even necessarily. So I think
mhm,
logic is very present on all the tests, but the CLT is going to be much more explicit about it, and to basically say, hey, in our quantitative reasoning section, you're going to get
mhm.
questions that barely feel like standardized test math at all. They feel like actual logic questions.
Right. Yeah. Do you have an example of that, actually? I feel like that would be a good way to kind of demonstrate this.
Absolutely. And what this comes from, I imagine that you can post this for listeners of the podcast, or this is where I'm happy to share this. It's essentially a problem set of CLT questions that we've written. I used to write and edit questions for the official CLT. I've served on their board of academic advisors, so very familiar with the content. And so these questions are ours. They're not official CLT questions, but they're very much based on them and modeled very close to them.
Hmm.
So I think it's helpful to start at one that is more at a basic level. This would probably be in the first 1/5 of the quantitative reasoning section. I say 1/5 because it's divided into 5 difficulties typically. So, like most
Hmm.
math sections, like as is true on the SAT and ACT, it gets harder as it goes. This is one you'd see relatively early, but it actually can be fairly challenging if you kind of get lost in the words or aren't used to making logical distinctions as it's called on you to make. So that's all
Mhm.
by way of introduction. Would you like me to read the first one here, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so to go right to it. Okay, great. So it says this. Here's the situation. It's a word problem. A school has a mock trial team, a debate team, and a quiz bowl team. By the way, I put that in there because I'm a quiz bowl coach too. Love quiz bowl. A student may not participate on all three teams, but must join at least one. Kiara is on the debate team, and Lucy is on the quiz bowl team, and one other team. Which of the following must be true? So before we go to the choices, I mean, what are your thoughts about what we've seen so far, Tyler? Like, does it lock in certain thoughts in your mind, or
Yeah, so basically it mirrors all the things that you just said. It is not obviously a math problem, right?
right,
But but then if you kind of get down to it, it is a math problem, right? You could turn these things into variables, right? Like K and L, and then you've got the three types of teams, right? You could call those X, Y, Z or whatever, right? And then you could start to say, okay, well, everybody has to be on one of the three, and then, they're one of them is on one, and then one of them is on the other plus one.
right?
And then you can like map it all out, and it'll look a little bit more like a math problem then.
Yep.
But it's still very much a logic problem first, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it does. You're saying that makes me think of the math concept of sets, right?
Hmm.
Groups of units that are groups of elements that are united by the same concept or characteristic, like the set of all integers or the set of all
Hmm.
perfect squares. We kind of have sets of these three teams, but
Hmm.
we have very limited information, and that makes it different from having a question about the set of all perfect squares where you can kind of start going, okay, well, that's 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and you're taking it in a math direction, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Also, by the way, great card game. It's like an old one. Set, if you've ever heard of
Oh,
that.
yeah. Yep.
So it's a tough one. My wife kicks my butt at it. But it's a good one for pattern matching. So
Absolutely.
yeah, what are the answer choices for this?
Yeah. So we've got Kiara and Lucy are on a team together. Remember, these are must be truths. So that's
Hmm.
A. Lucy is not on both the mock trial team and the debate team. Kiara is on neither the mock trial team nor the quiz bowl team. And Kiara is on both the mock trial team and the quiz bowl team. And one thing that's interesting about those choices is even just focusing on the language and understanding that logical statements have different kind of different operators that are telling you how what's called universal or particular they are. But what I mean
Hmm.
is basically think of the word all versus some.
Hmm.
I often tell my students if I say it sometimes rains where I live.
Hmm.
That's such a boringly obvious statement. It's practically not even worth saying, right? Of course it does. But the reason we instinctively know that's true is I put the word sometimes in there. It's a
Right.
very low bar to clear, right? But the moment I say it always rains where I live, if you're standing with me right now, you could just point out the window to falsify what I just said.
Hmm.
So if you're looking at the statements here, we probably want to stay away from the ones that sound like always because
Hmm.
they're less likely to always be true, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, and the other thing that I thought of immediately was that, you say a student may not participate on all three teams. And there's answer choices where, in order for the answer choice to be true, the student would be participating on all three teams, right? B, we know Lucy's on the quiz bowl team. So, Lucy is not on both the mock trial team and the debate team, but Lucy's on one other team. There are three teams. Three minus two equals one, and she's on two, so that can't be true. And then, D, Kiara is on the debate team. Therefore, having her also be on both the mock trial team and the quiz bowl team is impossible because she can't be on all three. You get rid of that. right? So now you're left with A, Kiara and Lucy are on a team together, and C, Kiara is neither on the mock trial team nor the quiz bowl team. So I actually don't know how to solve it from here because we know that Lucy's on one more team. The question is Kiara only on the debate team or is Kiara on a mystery number of teams? We just know that she's on the debate team, and it's unclear whether there's one or two.
Yeah. And, if one of my students for any standardized test asked that question that you just raised, a,
Mhm,
a good teacher would tell them always go back to the text, never assume
mhm,
anything. That'll get you into trouble. And you pointed out the only evidence we have about Kiara. Now, we could combine that with the other statement you referenced that you can't be on all three. So,
mhm.
do you want to put into words what the possibilities are for Kiara if she's definitely on the debate team?
Yeah, she can either be just on the debate team and the quiz bowl team, or on the debate team and the mock trial team.
Perfect. Okay, so we have those three possibilities, but since this is a must be true question, we'll have to
Mhm,
kind of lay that over the choices, looking at A and see
mhm.
if they require that. Like for A to be the answer, all three of the possibilities that you just said would have to put Kiara and Lucy on a team together.
Yeah, which means that, well, it basically means that Kiara would be on the debate team and the quiz bowl team, or Kiara would be on the debate team and the mock trial team, and Lucy would be on the quiz bowl team and the mock trial team. So those are the overlapping scenarios. There is a scenario where they are not on a team together, which is when Kiara is only on the debate team and Lucy's on the quiz bowl and mock trial teams.
Yep.
So, what does that mean?
Well, it means in logical terms, you found a counterexample, and that's
Mhm,
all that's required to eliminate a choice since the question
mhm.
says must be true. So
So
A,
it has to be C, even though C is not explicitly stated anywhere. You have to get to that point.
well, I really like how this conversation has unfolded, Tyler, because you've actually
Mhm.
exemplified excellent logical thinking coupled with an unfortunate oversight on one of your reading of one of the choices. Because it's actually not C. You said, well, let me see
It's
if you,
on neither, Kiara is on neither the mock trial team nor the quiz bowl team. What did I miss? What am I missing?
it's not about the way you read C. It's about the way you read an answer that you have already ruled out.
Oh no, which was it B? Did I mess this up?
You said about B that it's impossible for Lucy to be on both the mock trial team and the debate team.
Mhm.
But what does B
But
say?
it says that it says Lucy is not on both. Oh no. All right, well, hey, good test taking skills. You should probably get good at reading the questions carefully.
It worked out kind of perfectly though, the way you read that one, because I see that from students all the time.
Well, because I was looking at C and I was like, C is not ironclad either,
Right.
right? Like I was getting, I was like, did I do this wrong? What happened here?
Yeah, you were probably starting to think that I wrote this question wrong and there was no right answer.
That has happened before, actually.
That's
I've done questions with people where the question was actually written wrong, but no, this was on me. So it's B. Lucy can't be on both the mock trial team and the debate team because she's on the quiz bowl team. She has to be on only two out of the three total, and it listed all three of them basically. So that's a probably much faster way to get to the answer.
And it unites the things that are really most certain about the question. The question's asking must be true, but we know you
Mhm.
can never be on all three teams. And we know that Lucy is on the Quiz Bowl team. Like those are two very concrete things that if we tend to join together those kind of concrete or universal statements, usually like an inference comes out of it kind of naturally that, yeah, this she can't do something that would cause her to join the other two teams. And that's what we know for certain. There's so much that is just possible in this case. And that's what the other choices
Mhm.
tend to reference.
Yeah. Well, great. I think that was a really good example. And I think, yeah, just in general, right? Like the content of this test is not going to be wildly different from the SAT and ACT in terms of what skills it's testing. But it is testing additional skills, right? Sort of that logic layer in addition to the math. And addition, also using kind of different types of text for the English and reading questions. And, it kind of reminds me of like the GMAT and the GRE, even where, the GMAT has a logic layer that the GRE doesn't on some of its quant questions.
Sure.
Um, so very interesting. And so I guess for me, the question that now this kind of leads to is like, who is this test for, right? Who is the, like, why is, or so what's like, not just I don't know, the audience is maybe the wrong word, but like not just like who are the people that like the CLT, but kind of like, what type of parent is this test geared towards and like what type of student is it geared towards?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they're very specific answers. And then also, like you said, type answers. I got interested in it because I was both teaching at and my kids were going to a classical school. It was a classical Christian school. Um, and I think students who know, I guess I would say that kind of student knows who they are, right? And similarly, homeschooling students will tend to be drawn to this sort of test for a number of reasons. Like that's who the test was designed for. That's one answer, but
Hmm.
it's definitely not the only answer because of the type question that you asked. And I think that's where
Hmm.
students can, no matter what their educational background has been, ask
Hmm.
themselves as they get exposed to the CLT, like, are there certain things that I really latch on to? If let's say if you enjoyed the discussion that the two of us just had about this logic question, and that kind of
Hmm.
got you, got the neurons firing, got you interested in logic, keeping in mind that's a basic question and it can go much more challenging than that. Maybe the CLT is a good test for you. When I talked about analogy questions, and you feel like, yeah, I've just always felt like I'm a logical person. I think in
Hmm.
these logical sequential terms. Um, I'm always telling my friends, hey, what you said was illogical, or let's think about it logically. Um, that could be another sort of hook that might draw you into the CLT. And then finally, I guess I would say if you love to read and you love reading good stuff, you're kind of
Hmm.
naturally drawn. Maybe you're the kind of student who actually does read things outside of school, not just what school requires. I think you might really like the CLT if you're that sort of student. So it's worth exploring.
Yep. Yeah, not to mention, like we talked about at the beginning, right? Like ultimately the only way to truly future-proof your child's career is to make it so that there is no career and that they instead can pick up whatever's out there.
Yep.
And I don't know if the CLT necessarily is more angled towards that or not, but I think like the emphasis on logic and reasoning definitely is an argument to be made for that. Um, and yeah, I mean, it also, I feel like, you were talking when we were doing the prep for this that it really like aligned with kind of your own, like the way that you're teaching your kids and kind of like that was how you got to discover this.
Absolutely. And so yeah, if you can take a test that touches on the things that you love and value, then there's something particularly beautiful about that. And so I guess I'd go back to this idea of the marriage of the ideal and the practical. If speaking more to parents like myself, we have dreams for our students. We have ideals, we have values that we want to inculcate them in. Um, and then at the same time, the other benefit of having the CLT on a very raw practical level is for many colleges now there is a third option. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, it's really great that there already wasn't a complete monopoly because monopolies are rarely good and they're not good in the testing
Right.
world. It's good that there was already a choice
Yeah.
between SAT and ACT.
I say this on Comcast internet with PG&E power, and yeah, monopolies are not always good.
Exactly. I feel you. I feel you deeply. Um, yeah. So many who hear this, whether student or parent, may decide, the CLT is not for me. For I'm more drawn to one of the other tests for the following reasons, or they might be looking at a school that actually doesn't accept the CLT because it's growing,
Mhm.
but is not universally accepted. So there are
Right.
reasons. This is really about empowering parents and students to know the options that are out there, though, and particularly if you're really drawn to this test more so than the others, why not
Mhm.
explore it further?
Yeah, for sure. And that actually is a good segue to kind of, I think, just like wrap things up on. So what you mentioned, it's not accepted everywhere. Obviously, it's still accepted in a fair number of places. I think I saw on their website they have 250 colleges and
Right.
growing.
Yep.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts about that? I feel like there's kind of a type of university that's more likely to accept it than not.
Yes. Yeah, definitely smaller Christian, Catholic, liberal arts kinds of colleges. There are public schools that accept the CLT. One is actually where my son ended up. It's called Christopher Newport University. It's a smaller state university here in Virginia. Excellent school, um, but a little bit newer on the scene, a little bit smaller. And I think they have a real liberal arts emphasis, but they're a state funded school, so it's not a purely parochial test in that respect. But that
Right.
that definitely is the type of a school.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, because even I've gotten this question before myself. The test is not religiously affiliated at all. It is not, affiliated in any sort of direction. It contains like classical literature works, which aren't religious, right? Unless, I don't know, you consider philosophy a religion. Um, I think that the things that it emphasizes make those schools more likely to be early adopters, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a test for only those people.
That's right. And the other practical thing to consider is that it can be an additional what's often called a differentiator in
Mhm.
college testing because it's a pretty challenging test. It's not easy to get.
Yeah. When I looked at the concordance tables, like of like SAT scores to CLT scores and ACT scores to CLT scores, what struck me was that pretty much like getting 90% of the questions or more better on the CLT was equivalent of a perfect score on the other two.
Yeah, it's really interesting once they were able to make those concordances, and I think that's changing a little bit over time as a small number of students are conquering the very last frontiers on the CLT and getting perfect scores,
Right.
but it's extremely rare. I mean, by comparison, an 800 on an SAT section is kind of a dime a dozen compared to CLT. So all that to say, it's a great way. Think of it as being like National Honor Society or Model UN or any of the kinds of things you might pursue to show your particular interest and your aptitude, your intellectual acumen. The CLT is actually a great way to do that, to have one more thing that you're showing to colleges. And if it, for most students, that it might be a pretty unique kind of resume item to offer,
Mhm.
much more unique than being in a club or something that is just going to be on every application.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like you can't take both. So you can always have both and submit both to the schools that accept both, or, even just like one or the other, depending on how you do. So
Yeah,
very cool. Any kind of parting thoughts before we wrap up on this?
I would say explore, and there's like CLT, like the other tests have all kinds of. They have free materials out there. There's three practice tests online. I would definitely send folks to cltexam.org or com. I can't remember which one.
Yeah,
Um,
cltexam.com.
dot
Yeah.
com. Thanks. Yeah. So just to explore it more, eh, like many things, there's really a lot out there that you can discover for yourself before you ever make any commitment or frankly pay any money, whether it's registering for a test or paying for test prep or paying for a tutor or whatever that might look like, get to know it, and awareness raising about this test is in itself, its own reward.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Clay from Clayborne Education. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT course by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.